Pop, fired up. Do your job. Speaking of which, Stephen A., what responsibility does Pop have for his team's performance in terms of doing jobs?
As far as I'm concerned, very, very little. And the reason why I say that is because he's reached a point in his career where he has a license, or we have a license to take what he says and what he does for granted. I've been covering the NBA, Max, for over 2 decades. I never have encountered a time when I think that Gregg Popovich has lied about anything. I've never encountered a time where we've looked at him and we've said he didn't do his job because of effort. He may have made mistakes. There may have been something he could have done better. There were times, particularly during the NBA Finals loss to Tim Duncan, you got to remember that rebound that Chris Bosh captured and ultimately gave to Ray Allen to hit that tying 3. If I remember correctly, Tim Duncan wasn't on the floor. How can that not be? We might have questions about judgment calls from time to time because nobody's flawless. But there's 2 things that you can never, ever, ever say, possibly be 3 things you can never say about Gregg Popovich. You can never say he doesn't show up to work. You can't question his effort. You can't question his credentials. You can't question his honesty. These are the kind of things you can't question about this man. And so when he says what he says, first of all, he's absolutely right. Secondly, in today's generation, with the advent of social media and beyond, and everybody just as concerned about their brand as much as they're concerned about their performances and what have you, it's important that an old school dude, who, by the way, has won more than 69% of the games he's coached in his entire career, okay, and he's a 5-time champion, and 6 times he's been to the NBA Finals. He's universally recognized as the best coach in basketball, not to mention he's the guy that's going to succeed Coach K as the Olympic coach, okay? All of those credentials aside, we have to remember that this guy is a military man. He is about accountability. He is about making sure that you do the things that you're supposed to do. And when he says what he says last night, what he is saying is, we know what our job is. We know what our responsibilities are. And on occasion, there have been times this season where these guys haven't shown up effort-wise. And the person that I look at is a LaMarcus Aldridge. Because even though I haven't had an opportunity to watch every game for the San Antonio Spurs, and I'm not saying Gregg Popovich was talking about him. This is not insider information or anything. I'm just talking about what I'm seeing. I think that LaMarcus Aldridge is getting paid, and he is expected to do a lot. And I think the numbers that he's put forth and the energy that I anticipate and expected from him is not something I have seen when I have watched the Spurs play. He's not the only one. And I'm quite sure Gregg Popovich wasn't talking about just him. I'm just saying that I consider LaMarcus Aldridge big time. I have not seen a big-time player in LaMarcus Aldridge for the San Antonio Spurs this season. That's the only reason I bring his name up.
You think about the Spurs, and going into this season, you pay them lip service, as you do every season. Very few seasons, unless they had some extraordinary performance in the finals the year before, are the Spurs the one that everyone's picking. Everyone will pay lip service. Yeah, they'll be in the running, but it'll be this team or that team. And yet, here we are, where it was obviously the Cavs and the Warriors, and I said the Clippers had the best chance to upset the apple cart. I think you took someone in the East because you know, I guess the Cavs are a little more vulnerable than the Warriors once they get Durant, or whatever your reasoning was. And here are the Spurs with a chance to tie the all-time mark for road wins to start a season. Like, think of how good they are. And why? Because Gregg Popovich takes nothing for granted, except a culture of professionalism that he tries to cultivate. He said, no Newt Rockne speeches. You don't need to give a plumber a Newt Rockne speech. That's your job. And these guys are getting paid a lot of money to do their job. So when he's asked, what about you? Don't you have to get them ready? Aren't you also paid a lot of money to do that? He says, no. I'm not out there playing. Basically, he's saying implicitly, I did my job. I came prepared. Some of these guys didn't.
Exactly.
Now, if another coach without his track record were to say that, that could be problematic. Time out, coach. Ultimately, the buck stops with you. You didn't have your guys ready. But when it's the greatest coach active in the NBA and one of the all-time great coaches in the history of American team sports, that holds much more weight. And I want to say something quickly about egos, because the Spurs are a team where people, ego don't apply with the Spurs. It's not about egos. On the contrary, you have to have an extremely strong ego to play on the Spurs, because that's a coach who he's not going to coddle you like a child, nor will he berate you as though you're a child, but he's also not going to hide the fact, he's not going to hide his displeasure. It doesn't matter who it is. Even Tim Duncan, at his best, he will dress him down if Tim Duncan doesn't do what he's supposed to do. No one is above that on that team. So you have to have the kind of ego that can handle that. A coach who's going to say it has to be strong and it has to be based on a foundation of putting in the work. And a coach who's going to say, these guys weren't ready to play. It's not my job to motivate them to play. On this team, that has to be part of who you are. And it's one of the reasons that insistence on that code of professionalism that Gregg Popovich is so great.
Well, I get your point, but, getting back to, isolating specific individuals. We watched the Chicago Bulls last night. Like, Dwayne Wade is making me out to be a liar. I believe they were going to get to the players, but he feels they can make some noise, and they're playing like it, and they deserve a lot of credit. Him, Jimmy Butler, Rajon Rondo. By the way, Rajon Rondo getting a bad rap in certain respects, but we can elaborate on that another time. What I would tell you is this. You're going up against the Chicago Bulls. You're LaMarcus Aldridge. You shoot 5 of 15 from the field. The Spurs are minus 19 when you're on the floor. You're the successor to Tim Duncan. There's a responsibility that comes with that. He needs to play better. That's number one. Number two, there were rumors about him not being happy coming into the season. Young man, protege of mine, Jabari, wrote that. Mike Monroe, just a staple in the NBA community, one of the great NBA reporters in the history of this business, is also covering that game, covering that team. He's a dear friend of mine. LaMarcus Aldridge has better get his act together, because it's not just about Popovich. Those people covering the San Antonio Spurs, a few of whom I know personally, know what they're talking about with the game of basketball. Folks are going to start zeroing in on this man. LaMarcus Aldridge had better step up along with other people. He's better than that, and there are players on this team that are better than the way they're performing.
When Stephen A. says that, everybody, just keep in mind, it's not like, he's privy to a lot of information that no one else is.
We know. He calls himself Stephen Naismith. Guys, before we get back to football, though, one more NBA topic I want to get into right now surrounding your Knicks. Carmelo Anthony hit us with the subliminal